Welcome, friend. Before we begin, I'll share a small secret. Only about 1 in 10 listeners to these stories are subscribed. If you'd like more people to discover them, your like and subscription are a simple gift that helps guide others here. Think of it as lighting a little lantern along the path so fellow travelers don't lose their way. If you feel like sharing, you can also leave a comment telling us where in the world you're listening from and what time it is for you. It's always wonderful to see how far these stories travel, just as the myths themselves once did, carried from one place to another across centuries. And now, we begin. The myths of ancient Greece are filled with gods, heroes, and mysteries, but they all start in the same place. Not with Zeus, not with Athena, but with something far older. They begin in silence and darkness, in a great and endless void. The Greeks called it chaos. From that emptiness, the first powers of the universe emerged. Chapter 1. Chaos, Gaia, and the Birth of the Titans. Imagine the world before the world. No sky, no earth, no sea, just nothing. The ancient Greeks called this beginning chaos. Not chaos like a messy bedroom or a kitchen after someone just winged it with a new recipe. This chaos was a yawning, endless void, a quiet space where everything slept, waiting to be born. From that silence, the first beings appeared. The earth herself came into being, Gaia. She was not just land beneath our feet, but the living spirit of the world. Gaia stretched out into hills, valleys, and mountains, and she was powerful, steady, and unshakable. Then came Tartarus, a deep, shadowy abyss beneath the earth, a place so far below that even gods would fear it. Tartarus wasn't evil, but it was heavy and dark, a reminder that the world had both light and shadow. And soon after came Eros, the force of desire and attraction. Not just romance, but the spark that pulls things together. The force that makes earth embrace sky, that brings beings into union, and eventually creates life. Together, these primal beings began to shape existence. Gaia, strong and fertile, gave birth to the mountains and the sea. She then brought forth the sky, a being so vast he stretched above her. His name was Uranus, and he would become her companion. From their union, the first generation of giants was born, the Titans. Towering, powerful beings, they were the children of earth and sky. Among them were Oceanus, who ruled the waters that circled the world, Hyperion, who carried the light of the sun, Themis, who embodied divine law, and Cronus, the youngest, sharpest, and most ambitious. But not all their children were quite so majestic. Gaia and Uranus also had the Cyclopes, one-eyed smiths with incredible strength, and the Hecatoncheires, beings with 100 hands each. Uranus was not a fan. He looked at these children and saw not wonder, but terror. And so he pushed them deep into the earth, locking them away in Gaia's belly. This broke Gaia's heart. Imagine carrying children so full of power, only to have them forced back into darkness. She groaned under their weight, her cries echoing through the still young world. But Gaia was no passive figure. She began to plot. To her children, the Titans, she whispered, "Your father has wronged me. Who among you will stand with me? Who will cut down the rule of Uranus so the world can breathe free?" The Titans shifted uneasily. To betray their father was no small thing. Most stayed silent, but one, the clever and ambitious Cronus, raised his hand. He was not only brave but cunning, and he promised his mother he would act. Gaia crafted for him a sickle of unbreakable stone, sharp and strong. When Uranus descended to lie with Gaia, Cronus struck. With the sickle, he cut away his father's power, and from that act, the reign of Uranus ended. The blood that fell from Uranus did not vanish. From it sprang new beings, the Furies, spirits of vengeance, the giants, fierce and wild, and the Meliae, nymphs of the ash tree. Even from pain, life found a way. And from the sea foam where Uranus's severed power fell, a goddess would one day rise. Aphrodite, radiant with beauty, laughter, and desire. But that is a tale for later. For now, the world had changed. Uranus was dethroned, and Cronus, son of Gaia, took his place as ruler of the cosmos. He promised a new age, an age where Titans would reign. Yet already, seeds of trouble stirred. Cronus was not free of the same fears that haunted his father. He had seen what it meant for a child to overthrow a parent, and deep inside he wondered, would his own children one day do the same? The story of creation in Greek myth is not a gentle one. It is full of struggle, betrayal, and change. But within it lies a truth. Every ending carries the seed of a new beginning. From emptiness came life. From suffering came beauty. And from fear came the stories that humans would tell for centuries, about gods, titans, and the fragile, wonderful balance of the world. Chapter 2. Cronus, Rhea, and the Rise of Zeus. When Cronus overthrew his father Uranus, the world entered a new age. To the people who later told these stories, this was the age of the Titans, a time when powerful beings ruled with might and majesty. At first, the rule of Cronus seemed promising. He brought order where Uranus had brought fear. The land was fertile, the seas rich, and the skies bright. Later poets would even call this time a golden age, a period of peace when humans lived simply, without hunger or war. But power has a way of stirring anxiety. Cronus had seen what happened to Uranus, and he knew how quickly a son could become a rival. A prophecy reached him, whether from Gaia, the earth, or from the whisper of fate itself, that he too would be dethroned by his own child. This thought took root in his mind like a thorn. And so, Cronus made a decision that shocked even his fellow Titans. Every time his wife Rhea gave birth, he would swallow the child whole. It sounds almost comical, this great Titan gobbling down infants like they were figs, but to Rhea, it was devastating. Her first child, Hestia, gone. Then Demeter, Hera, Hades, and Poseidon, all taken before they had a chance to cry or breathe the world's air. Cronus believed he was clever, that by hiding his children in the cavern of his belly, he had secured his throne forever. But Rhea's grief grew with each birth. At last, when she carried her sixth child, she could no longer bear it. She sought help from her mother Gaia and her father Uranus, yes, the very Uranus who had once been overthrown. They counseled her to act with cunning. When her time came, Rhea traveled in secret to the island of Crete. There, in a hidden cave, she gave birth to her son Zeus. She placed him not in a cradle of gold, but in a simple one of stone, wrapped in swaddling cloth. His cries were fierce and full of life. To deceive Cronus, Rhea took a stone of equal size, wrapped it carefully in cloth, and handed it to him as though it were the child. Without suspicion, Cronus swallowed the stone whole, never realizing he had been tricked. Meanwhile, Zeus was hidden away in Crete, nursed by the goat Amalthea, and watched over by the Curetes, young warriors who clashed their shields and spears to drown out the sound of his cries. Raised in secret, Zeus grew strong, clever, and unafraid. As he reached manhood, the time came for him to challenge his father. Guided by Gaia, Zeus returned to Cronus, disguised as a cupbearer. With a mixture of cunning and divine power, he gave Cronus a special drink that forced the Titan to disgorge what he had swallowed long ago. Out came Zeus's brothers and sisters, Hestia, Demeter, Hera, Hades, and Poseidon, fully grown and ready to stand beside him. Reunited, the 6 children of Cronus formed a new family, bound by vengeance and destiny. They had been robbed of their childhoods, but together they would claim a future. What followed was not immediate peace. The struggle between the young gods, called the Olympians, and the elder Titans erupted into a cosmic war, the Titanomachy. Lightning, stone, and storm shook the very bones of the earth. But that tale belongs to the next chapter. For now, imagine the scene. Cronus, once the triumphant son who overthrew his father, staring at the children he had tried to destroy, now standing united, stronger than he had ever feared. Fate, it seemed, could not be swallowed. Chapter 3. The Titanomachy, War of Gods and Titans. The reunion of Zeus and his siblings was not the end of the story. It was only the beginning of a war that would decide the shape of heaven and earth for ages to come. Cronus still held power, and the Titans, mighty as mountains, stood at his side. Yet against them rose the younger gods, the Olympians, Zeus, Hera, Poseidon, Hades, Demeter, and Hestia. They were outnumbered, but they had something the Titans lacked: hunger. The hunger of youth, of change, of a new order that refused to be swallowed back into darkness. The world trembled as both sides prepared. From Mount Othrys, the Titans descended, their steps echoing like earthquakes. From Mount Olympus, the young gods rallied, their eyes burning with resolve. Mortals, fragile and bewildered, could do little but watch the skies split with lightning and hear the ground roar like thunder. Zeus, with his thunderbolts newly forged by the Cyclopes, struck first. These one-eyed smiths, long imprisoned by Cronus, had been freed by Zeus in exchange for their craftsmanship. With their hammers, they shaped weapons not of bronze or stone, but of storm itself. To Zeus, they gave lightning. To Poseidon, the trident that could stir seas into fury. To Hades, a helm of invisibility that turned him into a shadow no enemy could track. The battle raged for 10 years. Imagine thunder rolling without pause, the crash of waves battering the land, and the deep rumble of earth cracking under titanic blows. The Titans fought with raw strength. Oceanus, the great river encircling the world, rose in floods. Hyperion burned with the heat of the sun. Coeus, Creus, and Iapetus struck with spears of unyielding stone. Cronus himself wielded the sickle once used to wound his father Uranus. But the Olympians fought with cunning and cooperation. Zeus hurled lightning that lit the skies in blinding flashes. Poseidon split the ground with his trident, sending geysers roaring upward. Hades vanished into shadows, striking unseen before retreating back into darkness. Even then, victory was uncertain until allies arrived. Deep beneath the earth, the Hecatoncheires, giants with 100 arms and 50 heads, heard Zeus's call. Imprisoned by Uranus and later ignored by Cronus, they now broke free and turned the tide. With 100 hands they flung boulders that crashed like mountains falling from the sky. One by one the Titans faltered. Their strength could not outlast the relentless storm of the younger gods. At last, Cronus himself was defeated. Shackled in chains of unbreakable bronze, he and his Titan kin were cast down into Tartarus, a pit deeper than the mortal mind could imagine. There they would remain, guarded by the Hecatoncheires, forever exiled from the light. When silence finally returned, the earth bore scars. Mountains torn open, seas reshaped, valleys carved by divine rage. Yet from that chaos emerged a new order. The Olympians had won. They gathered atop Mount Olympus, high above mortal lands, and there they divided the world. Zeus claimed the sky and the throne of kingship. Poseidon took the sea, its endless waves his dominion. Hades received the underworld, the realm of shadows and souls. Hera became queen among the gods, while Demeter and Hestia tended the cycles of harvest and hearth. Thus the Olympian age began, not with peace, but with victory hard-earned through war. The Titans had fallen, but their memory lingered, a reminder that even gods are born of struggle. And Zeus, standing tall with thunderbolt in hand, knew the world was his to rule, yet also his to guard. For fate, as Cronus had learned, has a habit of returning when least expected. Chapter 4. Prometheus and the Gift of Fire. Among the Titans, not all had been cast into Tartarus. A few, who had sided with Zeus during the Great War, were spared. Chief among them was Prometheus, whose name means forethought. Unlike his brother Epimetheus, afterthought, Prometheus was cautious, clever, and often just a little too fond of thinking he was smarter than everyone else. Prometheus had a soft spot for humankind. To Zeus, mortals were fragile creatures, barely worth notice, yet Prometheus saw potential. He had helped fashion them from clay and breath, and he pitied their cold, shivering nights. One day, when the gods gathered to decide what portion of sacrifice they should receive from mortals, Prometheus tried to outwit Zeus. He prepared 2 offerings, one heap of bones wrapped in glistening fat, and one heap of good meat hidden beneath rough hides. To the eye, the bones seemed rich and enticing. Zeus, not fooled but unwilling to back down in front of the assembly, chose the shining pile. And from then on, the gods received the bones and fat of sacrifices, while humans kept the nourishing meat. Zeus did not forget this slight, but Prometheus was not finished. Seeing humans stumble in the dark, he decided to give them a gift the gods had kept to themselves: fire. Stealing a spark from the sun's chariot, or in some versions from the hearth of Olympus itself, Prometheus carried it down hidden in a hollow fennel stalk. Imagine the first time humans felt its warmth, saw its glow push back the night, or tasted food cooked over flame. It was nothing short of a revolution. With fire came not only comfort, but craft. Stone tools became sharper when tempered. Clay hardened into durable pots, and darkness itself was no longer terrifying. Fire turned humans from mere survivors into makers of culture. Zeus, however, was furious. He saw fire not as a blessing, but as dangerous knowledge, lifting mortals closer to the divine. In anger, he devised punishments, one for humanity and one for Prometheus himself. For mortals, Zeus ordered the creation of Pandora, the first woman, shaped from earth and gifted with beauty, charm, and curiosity. Into her keeping was given a jar, or box, as later stories called it, filled with all the troubles of the world: disease, toil, hunger, jealousy, sorrow. When Pandora opened it, these ills scattered across the earth, leaving only hope behind. a reminder that even in the darkest trials, a small light remains. For Prometheus, the punishment was harsher. Zeus commanded that he be chained to a lonely rock in the Caucasus Mountains. There, each day, an eagle swooped down to devour his liver. Each night it grew back, and each dawn the torment began anew. It was not eternal. Ages later, the hero Heracles would pass by, bow in hand, and slay the eagle, freeing Prometheus. But in those long years of suffering, Prometheus embodied the price of defying the gods, pain endured for the sake of compassion. The story is more than myth. To the Greeks, Prometheus was a symbol of the fire within, the drive to invent, to rebel, to bring knowledge, even when it is dangerous. Around hearths and in workshops, as sparks leapt from wood or metal, people remembered the Titan who dared. And though Zeus ruled Olympus, it is Prometheus whom many listeners found closer to their own hearts. For who among us has not wished for light in the darkness or felt that one bold choice could change everything? Chapter 5. Persephone and the Changing Seasons. Not all myths are about thunderbolts and wars. Some are quiet, woven out of longing and loss, the kind of story you feel when the air shifts from summer warmth to autumn chill. This is the tale of Persephone, the daughter of Demeter, goddess of grain and harvest. Persephone was a child of spring, often called Kor, the maiden. Wherever she walked, flowers bloomed, meadows brightened, trees filled with fruit, and even the sternest farmer smiled at the sight of her gathering blossoms. Demeter loved her fiercely, as any mother might, and guarded her as if she were the last seed in the world. But beneath the earth, another god watched her with growing desire, Hades, ruler of the underworld. He was not cruel, but he was lonely. The endless halls of shadow echoed with silence, and the dead do not make lively companions. He wanted a queen, someone to bring life to the land of the dead. One day, as Persephone wandered far from her companions, plucking flowers in a meadow, the ground split open. Out surged Hades in his chariot drawn by black horses. Before Persephone could cry out, he swept her into his arms and vanished into the underworld. The earth closed behind them as if nothing had happened, leaving only a single flower torn from its stem. When Demeter realized her daughter was gone, grief consumed her. She searched the earth endlessly, torch in hand, refusing to let crops grow. Fields withered, granaries emptied, and famine stalked humankind. Gods on Olympus grew uneasy. Without mortals to honor them with offerings, their power dimmed. At last, Zeus intervened. He sent Hermes, quick-footed messenger, to the underworld with an order. Persephone must be returned. Hades agreed, but not before playing one last trick. He offered Persephone a handful of pomegranate seeds. To eat in the underworld was to bind oneself to it. Persephone, perhaps hungry, perhaps curious, tasted 6 seeds. With that simple act, her fate was sealed. A compromise was struck. Persephone would return to her mother for part of the year, bringing joy and fertile earth. But for the months she had eaten seeds, she would remain with Hades, queen of the underworld. Thus, the Greeks explained the seasons. When Persephone rises, spring follows, and summer flourishes. When she descends again, Demeter mourns, and autumn fades into winter's cold. It is a myth of cycles, of growth and loss, warmth and chill, presence and absence. Farmers saw in it the rhythm of their fields. Mothers and daughters felt in it the ache of parting and the sweetness of reunion. And perhaps some even sympathized with Hades, whose desire, though selfish, came from solitude. The story also hints at a gentler truth. Even in darkness, life can take root. Persephone became not only a maiden of flowers, but also a queen of shadows, bridging two worlds. She was proof that joy and sorrow are not enemies, but companions, each giving the other meaning. And so, when the first green shoots pierce the soil after winter, it is said to be Persephone stepping lightly back into the sun, smiling as Demeter embraces her once more. Chapter 6. Heracles and his labors. If the Greeks loved their gods, they were just as fascinated by mortals who tried to live among them or survive them. Chief among these was Heracles, known to the Romans as Hercules. He was a man of impossible strength, but also of impossible troubles, many of them caused by the gods themselves. Heracles was the son of Zeus and a mortal woman, Alcmene. That meant Hera, queen of the gods and long-suffering wife of Zeus, was not exactly thrilled about his existence. To put it mildly, Hera made it her personal mission to complicate Heracles' life. If there was ever a curse, a madness, or a monster lurking nearby, chances are Hera had her hand in it. The greatest trial of Heracles' life came after a fit of madness. Again, Hera's doing. To atone, he was ordered to perform 12 impossible tasks, known as the labors of Heracles. Each was meant to break him. Instead, each became legend. First came the Nemean lion, a beast whose golden fur could not be pierced by any weapon. Heracles wrestled it barehanded, strangling it and wearing its hide as armor. Imagine showing up to your next challenge dressed in a lion pelt. It's both terrifying and, in a way, fashionable. Then came the Lernaean Hydra, a serpent with many heads. Cut one off, and 2 more grew in its place. With the help of his nephew Iolaus, Heracles burned each stump to stop the regrowth. One immortal head he buried under a massive rock, proof that even heroes sometimes rely on clever teamwork. There was the Ceryneian hind, a golden-horned deer sacred to Artemis. Heracles chased it for a year before finally catching it unharmed, showing that sometimes patience, not brute force, is the key. The Erymanthian boar was next, captured alive and dragged back through the snow, bellowing all the way. The sight of Heracles hauling this furious beast must have been as terrifying as the boar itself. Then came the Augean stables, filthy after years of neglect. Thousands of cattle had left behind. Let's just say more than anyone wanted to clean. Heracles solved it not with muscle but with engineering, diverting 2 rivers to wash the stables clean in a single day. Truly the first recorded plumbing success story. The Stymphalian birds, man-eating creatures with bronze beaks, were scattered with clashing noise and arrows. The Cretan bull was wrestled into submission. The mares of Diomedes, who feasted on human flesh, were tamed after Heracles fed their cruel master to them, brutal but effective. The belt of Hippolyta, queen of the Amazons, was taken after a mix of diplomacy, confusion, and, unfortunately, battle, depending on which version you hear. The cattle of Geryon, a giant with 3 bodies, were driven across great distances, guarded by the 2-headed dog Orpheus. The apples of the Hesperides, golden and guarded by a dragon, required trickery. Heracles even persuaded Atlas, the Titan who held up the sky, to fetch them, though Heracles, being Heracles, cleverly avoided getting stuck with the job permanently. Finally, the most daunting, capturing Cerberus, the three-headed hound of the underworld. With Hades' permission, granted on the condition no weapons be used, Heracles wrestled the beast into submission and carried it up to the world of the living, chains clinking, three heads snarling. These labors were more than feats of strength. They symbolized the human struggle against chaos, fear, and even nature itself. Each task transformed Heracles, shaping him from a man burdened by guilt into a hero celebrated across Greece. But Heracles was never perfect. He was reckless, sometimes violent, often unlucky in love, and maybe that's why his story endured, because he was both extraordinary and deeply human. In the end, after a life of triumphs and tragedies, Heracles was granted immortality, rising to Olympus to live among the gods. Perhaps even Hera, weary of her grudges, finally accepted him. After all, who else could carry a lion skin, a club, and a reputation big enough to echo through millennia? Chapter 7. Perseus, Medusa, and the Gorgon's Head. Long before Heracles wrestled lions in Cerberus, there was Perseus, a hero whose story begins with a prophecy. His grandfather, King Acrisius of Argos, was warned that his daughter's child would one day bring about his death. In true mythological fashion, Acrisius decided the best way to avoid fate was to lock his daughter Danae away in a bronze chamber. Of course, you cannot outwit Zeus so easily. The king of gods visited Danae in the form of golden light, or golden rain, depending on the version, and from this union, Perseus was born. Acrisius, terrified of prophecy, cast mother and child into the sea inside a chest. Instead of drowning, they washed ashore on the island of Seriphos, where they were taken in by a fisherman named Dictys. Years later, Dictys's brother Polydectes, the island's ruler, grew infatuated with Danae. To rid himself of young Perseus, Polydectes set the boy an impossible challenge: bring him the head of Medusa, the most fearsome of the three Gorgon sisters. Medusa was no ordinary monster. Once beautiful, she had been cursed by Athena so that her hair became writhing snakes, and her gaze turned living beings to stone. A glance was death. Perseus would need more than bravery. The gods lent their aid. Hermes gave Perseus a curved sword sharp enough to cut through anything. Athena provided a polished bronze shield, bright as a mirror. The nymphs of the north gifted him winged sandals, a cap of invisibility, and a special pouch to carry the Gorgon's head. With this divine toolkit, Perseus set out. Finding Medusa was no small task. Perseus sought out the Rhea, three ancient sisters who shared a single eye and tooth between them. By snatching their eye mid-passing, Perseus encouraged them to reveal the Gorgon's location. It was a dangerous yet oddly comical encounter. Imagine the three sisters arguing while groping blindly, shouting at Perseus to give back their eye. At last Perseus reached the Gorgon's lair, a desolate place littered with statues of warriors and beasts, once living, now frozen forever. While the two immortal sisters slept, Perseus crept toward Medusa. He dared not look directly, so he used the reflection in Athena's shield. Step by step, heart pounding, he approached. With one swift stroke of Hermes's blade, he severed Medusa's head. From her neck sprang Pegasus, the winged horse, and Chrysaor, a giant with a golden sword. Myth has a way of turning even death into new beginnings. Perseus tucked the head into his pouch, careful never to meet its gaze, and fled as the other Gorgons awoke, shrieking. The cap of invisibility saved him, carrying him away unseen. His journey back was just as storied. On the coast of Ethiopia, he found the princess Andromeda, chained to a rock, offered as sacrifice to a sea monster. Perseus swooped in, used Medusa's head to turn the beast to stone, and freed her. They would later marry, a heroic rescue with a romantic ending. Finally, Perseus returned to Seriphos. Polydectes, who had never expected to see him again, mocked the young man. In answer, Perseus revealed the Gorgon's head. One glance, and Polydectes and his court turned to stone. Justice, as the Greeks might say, in its most literal form. Later, Perseus gifted Medusa's head to Athena, who set it upon her shield, the Aegis, as a weapon to terrify enemies. As for the prophecy, well, fate is patient. Perseus would one day accidentally cause Acrisius's death, fulfilling the oracle's words despite every effort to avoid it. Perseus's story is one of cunning as much as courage. He triumphed not by charging recklessly, but by using reflection, patience, and the gifts of the gods. And perhaps that's the quiet lesson. Sometimes survival depends not on looking directly at a problem, but on finding the right angle. Chapter 8. Theseus and the Labyrinth. If Perseus was clever and Heracles was strong, Theseus was a mix of both with a dash of political savvy. His legend is tied forever to a monster and a maze, the Minotaur and the Labyrinth. Theseus was the son of Aegeus, king of Athens, or in some tellings Poseidon himself. Raised in Troezen, he grew up strong and determined to prove himself. When he finally set out for Athens, he chose the land route instead of the safe sea. Along the way he cleared the roads of bandits, each more gruesome than the last. Theseus had a knack for poetic justice. He punished villains in the same way they tormented their victims. For example, a giant who stretched people on a bed or chopped them down to size met the same fate on his own device. Grim, yes, but it made the road safer. In Athens, Theseus found his father's throne and quickly volunteered for a dangerous mission. Athens, at that time, was forced to send 7 young men and 7 young women every 9 years to Crete, tribute to King Minos. These youths were cast into the Labyrinth, a sprawling maze built by Daedalus, to be devoured by the Minotaur, half man and half bull. Theseus vowed to end this cruel practice. Sailing to Crete with the doomed youths, he promised his father that if he succeeded, he would raise a white sail on his return. If he failed, the ship's black sail would remain. In Crete, fate intervened in the form of Ariadne, daughter of Minos. She fell in love with Theseus, and perhaps more importantly, wanted to see the killing stop. She gave him a ball of thread, the famous clue, to unravel as he entered the labyrinth, ensuring he could find his way out again. Love and practical tools, a winning combination. Inside the twisting passages, Theseus advanced carefully, marking his path with the thread. At the heart of the maze, he confronted the Minotaur. Accounts differ. Some say he fought bare-handed, others that he used a sword Ariadne gave him. Either way, strength and skill prevailed, and the beast fell. Following the trail of thread, Theseus emerged victorious, leading the other Athenians to safety. Together with Ariadne, he fled Crete, pausing only to strand her on the island of Naxos. Whether by accident, divine command, or cold-hearted choice, depends on the version. There Dionysus, god of wine, would later claim her as his bride. Tragedy shadowed the triumph. As Theseus returned to Athens, he forgot, or neglected, to change the black sail to white. King Aegeus, watching from a cliff, saw the dark sail and believed his son dead. Overcome with grief, he threw himself into the sea, which ever since has borne his name, the Aegean Sea. Thus, Theseus gained a kingdom but lost a father, a bittersweet reminder that even victories in Greek myth carry a price. Yet Athenians remembered Theseus not only as a hero, but also as a unifier, the one who helped bring scattered villages together into a single city. His story was more than a monster slaying. It was about shaping order from chaos, just as he had tamed the Labyrinth. And so, Theseus's name endured, woven into both history and legend, standing alongside Heracles and Perseus as one of Greece's great champions. Flawed, yes, but undeniably memorable. Chapter 9. Odysseus and the Long Journey Home. Among all the heroes of Greek myth, few were as clever, or as unlucky, as Odysseus. The king of Ithaca was not the strongest warrior at Troy, but he was the most cunning. It was his idea to hide soldiers inside a great wooden horse rolled through the gates as a gift that finally brought down the mighty city. Victory was sweet, but the road home would be anything but. The gods were not in agreement about Odysseus. Athena admired his wit. Poseidon, however, held a grudge after Odysseus blinded his son, the Cyclops Polyphemus. And when a sea god dislikes you, every wave becomes personal. Odysseus's voyage stretched on for 10 years. Along the way, he encountered trials that tested his patience, courage, and faith. One of the most famous was the encounter with Polyphemus. Trapped in the giant's cave, Odysseus gave his name as nobody. After blinding the Cyclops with a sharpened stake, he and his men escaped clinging to the bellies of sheep. When Polyphemus cried for help, saying, "Nobody has hurt me," his fellow giants shrugged and left him alone. Clever wordplay can be life-saving. Then came the lotus eaters, whose flowers caused forgetfulness so deep that Odysseus had to drag his men back to the ships. Sometimes the greatest danger isn't violence, but the temptation to simply give up. Sailing on, Odysseus faced Circe, a sorceress who turned men into pigs. With Hermes' help, he resisted her magic. Interestingly, instead of slaying her, he became her guest and lover for a year. This says something about Odysseus. He was as adaptable in diplomacy as he was in combat. Later, he braved the sirens, whose songs lured sailors to destruction. Odysseus had himself tied to the mast, ears open, while his men rowed with wax in theirs. He heard the deadly music and survived, perhaps the only man to ever do so. Then came the narrow straits of Scylla and Charybdis, a six-headed monster on one side, a deadly whirlpool on the other. Odysseus chose to pass closer to Scylla, sacrificing a few sailors rather than risking all. A grim but pragmatic choice, the kind every leader dreads. On the island of the sun, god Helios, his crew disobeyed warnings and ate sacred cattle. For this, Zeus struck their ship with a thunderbolt. Odysseus alone survived, washed ashore on the nymph Calypso's island. There he remained for 7 years, loved and trapped, until the gods finally ordered his release. At last, after storms, shipwrecks, and countless delays, Odysseus reached Ithaca. 20 years had passed since he left. His palace was overrun with suitors, men feasting on his wealth and pressing his wife, Penelope, to remarry. She, clever as he, had delayed them by weaving a shroud by day and unraveling it by night. Disguised as a beggar, Odysseus returned in secret, tested by Penelope's riddles, and finally revealed when he strung his great bow and shot an arrow through 12 axe heads, a feat only he could perform. With his son Telemachus at his side, he drove the suitors out and reclaimed his home. The Odyssey is more than a tale of adventure. It is about endurance, about longing for home, and about the strength of patience. Unlike Heracles, Odysseus's battles were as much against despair and temptation as against monsters. He showed that wit could match muscle, and that the greatest victory might simply be stepping across your own threshold at last. Chapter 10. Orpheus and the Song of the Underworld. Not all heroes carried swords or spears. Some wielded only their voice. Orpheus was such a figure, a poet, a musician, a singer whose melodies could charm wild beasts, calm storms, and even move stones to tears. His gift came, the poet said, from Apollo himself, god of music and light. Orpheus's story is not one of war, but of love. He married Eurydice, a maiden of great beauty and gentleness. Their happiness, however, was brief. On the day of their wedding, Eurydice was bitten by a serpent and died, her soul carried down into the underworld. For most, this would be the end. But Orpheus's love refused to be silenced. With his lyre in hand, he descended into the realm of Hades, where no mortal was meant to tread. The underworld was guarded by horrors, rivers of fire, the three-headed Cerberus, shades of the dead, but all were soothed by Orpheus's song. Even the Furies, whose hearts burned with vengeance, wept at his music. The sound of his lyre softened the shadows, and the silent halls of the dead rang with a melody they had never heard before. At last, he stood before Hades and Persephone, king and queen of the dead. Instead of begging or bargaining, Orpheus simply sang. He sang of his love, of the cruelty of fate, of the warmth of the sun he and Eurydice once shared. He asked not for immortality, nor for riches, but only for her return. Even Hades, who rarely bent to please, was moved. Persephone, too, was touched by his devotion. They granted Orpheus a chance. Eurydice could follow him back to the world of the living, but under one condition: he must not look back at her until both had fully left the underworld. And so began the most delicate journey. Orpheus walked ahead, Eurydice following, her steps light as a whisper. He heard her behind him, but the silence pressed upon him like a weight. Doubt gnawed at him. Was she truly there, or was it a cruel trick? At the very mouth of the cave, sunlight spilling in, his faith faltered. He turned. For a brief heartbeat, he saw her, pale, radiant, reaching toward him. Then she was gone, pulled back into shadow, lost forever. Orpheus cried out, but no music could open the gates a second time. Grief-stricken, he wandered the earth, singing songs of sorrow so deep that trees leaned toward him and rivers paused in their flow. In some tellings he met his end at the hands of Maenads, frenzied followers of Dionysus who tore him apart for spurning their revelry. In others he simply faded, his voice carried off by the wind. Yet always the story ends with Orpheus reunited with Eurydice in death, his song echoing forever in memory. The myth of Orpheus is not one of triumph, but of fragility. It reminds us that even the strongest love can be undone by doubt, And yet that love, expressed through song or story, can outlast death itself. And perhaps that is why the Greeks treasured this tale, not because it ended happily, but because it spoke to something universal, the power of art to touch the divine, and the bittersweet truth that loss is part of love. Chapter 11. The Trickster. Hermes. Not all gods were thunder-throwing kings or underworld lords. Some were troublemakers, clever, sly, and quick on their feet. Hermes, messenger of the gods, was one of these. From the very day of his birth, Hermes proved he was not a child to be underestimated. Legend says that as a newborn, he slipped out of his cradle, toddled off, and promptly stole Apollo's cattle. To hide his tracks, he made the cows walk backward and even tied brushwood to his feet as makeshift sandals to cover his own footprints. Apollo, not amused, marched up to Zeus to complain. But when Hermes played his lyre and sang, even the sun god had to smile. Theft forgiven, sort of. This was Hermes's way, fast-talking, charming, always skating on the thin line between mischief and genius. He carried the caduceus, a staff entwined with serpents, symbol of peace and negotiation. He wore winged sandals that carried him across the mortal and divine worlds, delivering messages, guiding travelers, and, perhaps most importantly, escorting souls to the underworld. The Greeks loved Hermes not only as a god of trade and travelers, but also as a patron of wit. He represented the spark of cleverness that could solve problems without brute force. To a farmer, Hermes was the one who made a tricky deal go smoothly. To a thief, well, he was practically the family mascot. His stories always carried a glimmer of humor, but also a reminder. Quick minds could rival strong arms. In a world of mighty Olympians, Hermes showed that wit had its own kind of divine power. Chapter 12. The Tragedy of Icarus. Sometimes myths were warnings, not just entertainments. The tale of Daedalus and Icarus is one of the most enduring. Daedalus was a brilliant inventor, the mind who designed the labyrinth itself. But genius can be dangerous under the wrong ruler. King Minos of Crete, not eager for Daedalus to share his secrets, locked him and his son Icarus in a high tower. Where others saw a prison, Daedalus saw a challenge. With feathers gathered from birds and wax melted from candles, he fashioned wings, great, fragile constructions meant to carry them into the sky. Before takeoff, Daedalus warned his son, "Fly too low, and the sea's spray will weigh down your feathers. Fly too high, and the sun will melt the wax. Keep to the middle path." At first, the flight was miraculous. The two soared over the waves, free at last. Fishermen and shepherds looked up in awe, thinking gods had taken to the air. But exhilaration overcame caution. Icarus, swept away by the joy of flying, rose higher and higher. The sun softened the wax. The feathers fell away. With a cry, he plummeted into the sea. Daedalus, heartbroken, pressed on alone, his invention both triumph and curse. The sea where Icarus fell still bears his name, the Icarian Sea. The Greeks told this story as a reminder of hubris, the danger of overreaching. Yet it is also a tale of wonder, showing how deeply humans dream of flight, of breaking limits, of touching the sky. Icarus failed, but in his failure, he became immortal in memory. Closing reflection, the eternal echo of myths. And so our journey through the myths of ancient Greece comes to an end. We have walked with gods and titans, stood beside heroes in their trials, and listened to songs that reached even the underworld. From the laughter of Hermes to the sorrow of Orpheus, from the triumphs of Zeus to the fall of Icarus, each story has carried a spark of something timeless. The Greeks told these tales not only to explain the world, but to understand themselves. They found in the gods their own strengths and flaws, their own hopes and fears. And in the heroes, they saw the endless struggle to endure, to outwit, to rise, and sometimes to fall. As the stories fade into quiet, perhaps you can feel how myths are not confined to marble temples or dusty scrolls. They live on whenever we tell them again, around a fire, on a page, or whispered into the night. Now, let the voices of gods and mortals slip away. Let the storms of Zeus and the songs of Orpheus drift into silence. Rest as if upon a calm sea, guided by the same stars that shone above Odysseus. The world of myth will still be here when you wake. Sleep peacefully, dream gently, and carry with you the eternal echo of stories that have endured for thousands of years.